Hello and welcome to this webinar. My name is Tanya Bharadwaj. I drive content and thought leadership at NIAM. As you know, today's discussion is titled How Design Can Power Business Success. So what we're really hoping to do over the next sort of hour or so is really talk about how design can be a critical business differentiator. And as more and more companies sort of wake up to that realization, what is it that both senior leaders and designers in a company can really do to try and sort of connect the dots between the two. I'm super stoked about, the panel that we've sort of stitched together for you. It's nothing short of an A-star lineup, and you'll know as, we sort of get along. So let me do a quick round of introductions to, get you folks acquainted with who's sort of joining us today. I'll start with the lady on the panel. We've got Sheldon. Sheldon is the director of product design at Facebook. She has close to 20 years of experience that ranges from internet companies like Facebook, Yahoo, and Microsoft, and unicorn startups like Grab and Didi. As a seasoned design leader, she really prides herself in fostering innovation by building multicultural and cross-disciplinary teams. Hi, Xiaodang. Thanks so much for really, doing this for us, because I know for both you and Satyam, it's pretty bright and early, isn't it?
Yes, a little bit early, but it's such a pleasure. Thank you for inviting us.
Thanks. Okay, next up is Satyam. Satyam is the founder and managing partner at UXReactor. It's one of the fastest growing specialized, user experience firms in the US. He's really been the primary driver in developing a design playbook that, sort of connects the dots between design, business, as well as engineering. It's called the pragmatic UX. And it really serves as the foundation of the UXReactor practice as well. Before sort of striking out on his own, Satyam held senior design leadership positions at PayPal as well as Citrix. Good morning, Satyam.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks so much. And then joining in from the UK, we've got Peter. He's the founder of Build for Mars. It's a UK-based UX advisory, but I have to say that in some circles, he's also sort of referred to as the American Idol of fintech. And that's a sort of coveted title that he's acquired after he spent something like 3 months opening 12 bank accounts and really logging the journey. But fintech apart, I would really urge the audience to go check out Build for Mars, because it's really, one of the best places on the internet that's sort of dedicated to highlighting the difference between good and great UX. So thank you, Peter, for taking the time out.
That's nice to be here, and that's the nicest intro I've ever had. So I'll take American Idol.
Yay! I'm so happy. Great. Before we sort of deep dive into this discussion, I wanted to spend just some time on, have our panelists sort of reflect on the topic, how design can power business success. And Sheldon, I'm going to start by asking you, through your career, you've sort of worked at the intersection of product, tech, and business. You've done this at large multinationals and at startups. How were you to describe the relationship that sort of exists between design and business teams? And how would you say that's evolved from the time that you started out in the profession?
It's a great question. And I think the relationship between design, product, tech, and the business has definitely evolved, but it largely also depends on the company's culture and the business nature, as well as what are the existing collaboration processes, right, that's in place. Mm-hmm. At different companies, right, you will see different relationships. In most online internet companies that I have worked for, I find that our very business is the online product. Therefore, the design and the business are closely tied together. And the teams usually share a common goal, but they specialize in their unique domain areas. For example, when I work, because the question asked about the involvement, right? So I want to share a little bit context, right? With,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, for example, when I worked at Yahoo Europe back in the early 2000s, as a designer, I worked very closely with our marketing, business development teams, business analysts, and our general management teams. And we worked in our own areas, but we achieved the business goals collectively. It was very clear that, hey, we all had a common goal. And fast forward, right, to 2015, as my career progressed into the ride-hailing industry, right, which is the new industry, and it has both online and offline components. So that's where I've observed the relationship between design and business has changed, because we can see a clear separations between the two. While our offline teams like marketing, business development team, they're focusing on the ground user acquisitions and retentions. And for the online team, as the design team, for instance, right, we are focusing on offer the best-in-class user experience for those new and existing users. But you know, in the end of the day, right, we still share a common goal, which is to increase market share, but we do it in a different way. So I think another example I want to give, right, is that even so that we have a different focus, but still design actually led a lot of business innovations. For example, with food delivery services, driver payout services, payment services, etc. Those are all heavily influenced by design. So the relationship is definitely still a close tie, right, in a different manifestation.
Okay. Satyam, let me ask you, you know, how much of that sort of resonates with you? And I'm asking this because, you know, based on our conversations, I know that the genesis of UXReactor somewhere was really the need to sort of challenge this notion that, you know, hey, design belongs to the draft board and doesn't necessarily influence the goings on, so to speak, in the boardroom. So talk to us a little bit about your personal journey and, you know, what prompted you to sort of take a hard look at this relationship that exists between design and business.
That's actually a very valid question, and I'll just probably take it on a little bit further into how have I seen the evolution of this profession. So I think the profession of UX design foundationally has, you know, evolved over the last 2 decades by all means, but with the advent of all these internet companies, all these mobile apps and so on and so forth, more and more UX is kind of coming to the fore. But the biggest problem is, again, I would say, which kind of UX? So I would define the 3 basic levels that actually the UX or UI kind of gets impacted on. So a lot of the firms actually, when you say working with business or working with any of the collaborative partners, is still in the layer of like, let's make some app, let's make some product, let's make something. And then a little bit more mature organizations are going on further to like, okay, let's understand what the user is doing, what the context is, and kind of building on that. But when you truly look at the power of design and you start looking at the level of saying, is the CEO of the company actually the chief experience officer of the company? Are they thinking about how is customer success, working with customer support, working with product, working with marketing, working with sales? And that truly is a transformation that kind of is foundationally business centric. And I think that is not coming through at this point. I think the evolution is just about starting when you look at a company like Zappos saying that, you know, hey, we would like everybody to attend customer support calls before they even start their job. That's still a design technique where you're building deep empathy into what the users want and what the customers want. And I think to that level, the business is still about getting there. But to the point of getting user insights and building that, that's kind of where right now the business is, I would say, in the maturity cycle. Now, when you look at it, back to my question about why did we found, did the world need another design firm? Answer is no, it doesn't need another design firm. But the way design is evolving, it needs the people and the process and the environments to kind of come together. And then we realized the only way to do that was building a firm from scratch. And that's where the UXReactor came to be. And I think the reason why we did that was a watershed movement, and our journey was going to business school. So I did an exec MBA from HBS, and sitting down with a lot of smart, stakeholders there, who actually had, multi-millions to $billion budgets, talking about problems that designers could solve. Like, I don't know why my users are not adopting my product. I don't know why my users are not retaining. My retention is low. My churn is high. My productivity is low. These are all problems that design and design profession can solve. And that's when we said, we need to kind of build something from scratch. That's the short answer of the question that you asked.
Okay, thank you. Peter, let's talk about your experience. You've spent countless hours documenting, analyzing the user experience of a dozen British banks, both incumbents as well as challengers. In a sense, sort of convincing companies that, hey, you need to look at your user experience to convert and, acquire customers. I'm curious to know, how that sort of landed, and if you can also give us a high-level understanding of not just your findings, but what those findings tell you about the way some of these legacy institutions, and I'm talking about the incumbent banks here, how they think about design and business strategy.
Yeah, sure. So, well, the general purpose of it was, pretty much what's just been said, right? Like the difference between a good app and a good company is that a good company, understands that experience transcends an app. A great designer could design a great app, but then the entire company has to come together in, support and the experience, user experience is not new, right? Like banks did this 30, 40 years ago with really nice branches, and you'd walk in and you'd see all the, the costumes that everyone was wearing and all, everything like that. People don't walk into branches as much now, so that money is being put elsewhere. If they had apps 50 years ago, they would have had to spend money on nice apps eventually. And what's happened is digital products have become so popular and so expected that the bar has just constantly been raised. And now that money that would have gone into, a really nice high street branch is now going online and into the experience. So the purpose with the bank study I did, because I've done a study into lots of companies, like Disney, things like that. The purpose of it was just to show, look, you can see which companies have a good culture around UX based on the evidence they leave on their app, right? If they do things like, there's a numerical field and you click into it and it doesn't open the numerical keypad, someone hasn't thought of that. And that's like, why didn't they think of that, right? And these huge companies like banks don't have the excuse to have not done it because they have enough money. They're not a startup making decisions about what they can and can't do. They can just spin up another team and get someone to think about that stuff. Yeah. So the purpose was always just to show the difference between Monzo, Revolut, and Starling and these traditional banks is not just they have a nice app. It's that they have the culture that over the next 20 years will mean they are a better bank if they keep that up, and if the traditional banks don't evolve to have that culture.
Mm-hmm. Right. Since we're talking about culture, and at this point, I'd also sort of urge our attendees to leave their questions. You can do that, with using the Q&A window or even in a chat box. So we're not going to wait till the end of the session to take these questions. We'd be sort of happy to, take them as and when they come. But Sheldon, let me go back to, the culture. And I think one question that's sort of come a lot, a lot of folks who've sort of registered and sent this to us through email is that as a design professional, how do you increase your influence within your organization so that you can be better aligned to business outcomes?
This is a very good question, and it's very relevant, right, to our day-to-day and to our career. I think it really depends on your organizations, right? Usually in organizations where there are high-level awareness of design's value, it's not so much, right, you need to do, right, to increase your influence because influence is there. So I will focus a little bit on the companies that has probably a bit less awareness of design and how you can, right, just take it as a reference, right, approach it. I think the first thing that's really important and where I usually start is really on user research, on building empathy. So I think that's where the design starts, right? Because, in the end of the day, whether we're talking about UX, we're talking about design, it's really all about users, understanding the users and solve their problems, and to bring that shared empathy to our collective teams, right, to the company. So I think what I would usually recommend, right, is to make sure that, hey, offer an opportunity, right, for all of your stakeholders to participate in some user researches, or at least listen to some research share out, because this is the easiest way to build empathy. And in addition, I would bring design workshops to the collaboration process, to the organization, right? Whether you want to solve big problems or small problems. And the people participating really depends on who you can influence immediately, right? I would try to involve the CEOs or the senior executives to the day-to-day, your co-workers, right, of our product managers or front-end engineers. I think very, very often my observation is that people really enjoy this co-creation process, because people felt that, hey, we can all contribute equally to the product ideations. And this process, right, really helped me to increase design influence. I think after people see the clear value in this collaborative design process and in building user emphases, I think then it becomes very easy to align everyone to a common goal. So I think to rephrase this question, right, if I may, it's not so much about design aligns with the business outcomes, in my view. Rather, it is about design facilitating business outcome alignment. So I think that's where design has the biggest influence, right? It's not so much, hey, are we working on this common goal, but how do we land to this common goal, right? Did everybody have an equal seat and share their contributions to that process? And so how do we do this, right? Is that I think for many designers we're familiar with, but for folks who probably have not done a lot of design thinking workshops, I want to share a little bit about this journey. That's why I think it's very powerful, right, for the participants. After a couple of workshops in my experience, people usually feel, oh my God, you can do things this way. So what do we do, right? It really is to offer kind of time-boxed set of exercises to bring people to start with building a shared vision mission, and then to break it down. Very often, especially in startup world, right? We talk about vision, mission, and then, okay, 2 months, we want to achieve this vision, mission, and you always fail, right? Because it's not feasible. So it's very important to break that down to short, mid, and long term. And then obviously we offer competitor analysis, build personas, mapping user journeys, et cetera, et cetera. So with this process, right, you set your success measurements, your risk analysis, you prioritize what you want to build. And this way, right, you can see people really understand why design is so important, right? And that's how you influence them.
Okay. Satyam, similar question to you. How do you enable business goals to user experience?
How do you enable business goals to user experience? So I think I foundationally look at most businesses trying to get money from their customers, right? That's basically how I would bring it down to. And why would customers pay? I'll just give you one statistic which has been very profound for us, which is 42% of startups fail because of product market fit. And that just is a sheer waste of time, energy, and effort, especially as Sheldon actually just mentioned that research is not being leveraged as effectively. Like, people don't even talk to the customers. In fact, the statistic that was done was 50% of the companies release a product or a feature without even talking to a customer, right? So now coming back to how does design impact business? The simple most thing of design impacting business is actually understanding what those business problems are. Is it adoption, retention, satisfaction? These are all user problems. I mean, users are not coming to your product, leveraging your product, and so on and so forth. And when you connect to that, and I think influence foundationally comes from impact. If you can impact those numbers, influence will automatically come. I'll just tell you an interesting story. I was talking to a general manager of a very successful product line. And I was like, you need to do more design, you need to put more stuff. And his simple answer was like, why would I invest in design when I can invest in sales? For every dollar in sales, I get $10 back. And it's just a foundational shift in terms of how you look at it. Because if design is not going to look at the fact that I can give you more users, I can give you more markets, I can give you more engagement, more satisfaction, more productivity, you're not going to have that conversation, right? A lot of people really worry about the craft and not about the impact, because the craft is a toolkit, right? And in fact, I say some of the best experiences have zero UI. And just foundationally putting yourself in that perspective and reframing how you're going to approach it. And the design toolkit is a very, very powerful toolkit, because you can go talk to users, you can go build prototypes, you can test different things, you can iterate on it without really spending a lot of money. And this powerful tool set is not used effectively in the business side, you'll not make the impact and therefore not the influence. So I would say foundationally starting from that aspect of what is business trying to do, how do you leverage your toolkit, and not get caught too much on the method itself, because that just is the means to getting there.
Right. Peter, any thoughts on that, on how how do you sort of influence those who believe that, user experience is more sort of, is a craft-based sort of profession? How do you kind of align those sort of folks to say, hey, design can actually be a force multiplier for your business?
Yeah, so I think I probably take a different stance on this, right? And I'm about to butcher your name. Ziadan? Is that?
Sheldon, yes. Sheldon. Yeah.
Sorry, Sheldon. So one of the things that you said was obviously, you go in and you go through these workshops, and that is the sort of thing that I think works in some companies, right? And that can get you from point A to point B quite well. Incredibly difficult if you're working with people who don't understand how to talk to their customers. Like, there is a difference between talking to your customers and understanding what your customers mean, because like, people are upsettingly irrational, right? They say things they don't mean, they do things they don't really want to do. And so asking people, well, what do you think of this, often gets you nowhere. So, part of, what I try and do when I work with clients or put just like content out on the internet is, sometimes speaking to customers isn't the best thing to do. And sometimes what you need is someone who deeply understands the industry, and then people who don't understand the industry at all, right? You have people at a company, people who work. So a good example is whoever built the Falcon 9 rocket, right? The SpaceX one, where the recent there, the touchpad like controls, like whoever was working on that has such an understanding of how that all works that you take that touchpad and you give it to an idiot like me and I won't be able to use it, because I'll be like, what does that mean, right? We live two different lives. So sometimes you need to step outside of the company that you're in, and that's the only way that you can kind of get a truer understanding of what your customers think, because customers don't tell you what they think most of the time, is what I think. But that's not to kind of downplay any of what else has just been discussed with the methodology. Like, the methodology is sound, it works really well, like some of the time.
Yeah, sure. That's a contrarian view. Okay, I'm just going to take a few questions. And there's a question here, Xiaodang, and maybe Satyam and Peter can also chip in. It says, investing in design is normally an expensive proposition for a lot of early stage startups. How does one change that mindset? That's one question that's coming from Amrita. And then there's another question that says, could you share some resources or point our participants to some resources, to sort of get a better understanding of Xiaodang, what you just referred to in terms of research?
So yeah, I can cover a little bit and then share with let Satya and Peter share more. I think number one question was that how do we get more investment in the design space, right? Because it's expensive and costly.
Yeah, and especially for early stage startups. That's the pointed question that Amrita is asking.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great context, right? I think if possible, right, it really pays off if you can find a more well-rounded designer, because in my view, right, you don't need a huge team of design folks, right, to start a business, but you need someone who can do a lot. And when I say well-rounded, what does it mean, right? It means that if you can find someone who had the exposures or experience in both interaction design, visual design, and research, I think that is what I call well-roundedness, because you need someone who can come in to help you to understand user problems and to come up with the wireframes, the information architectures, and then to do the visual design so that you have an end-to-end product, right, from a UX perspective. So I would say that is one way. Another way is that if you can't afford a full-time, maybe you can take a freelancer, right? But I would still require similar well-roundedness. And so you have this on a project basis. And you can see, hey, as we see return on investment with early stage designs, or when you start rolling out your MVPs, you start to see more promising results from your early investment, you can obviously invest more. I'd love to hear more from Satya and Peter. on this front?
I can chime in a little bit here. I think the question was very well framed, which is like, how do you get the companies into that mindset? And I think the key word is the mindset. Most founders don't go look at design as a skill that they need to bring on their team, but foundationally, it's a mindset. The mindset that actually says that I'm going to consistently be building high empathy as an organization around the users I'm trying to solve, which is again back to my point. Why does, there's no reason why 42% of the company should fail because of product market fit. That just means that they have not understood their customers. They don't understand what makes them, really work. Now that's mindset of, then you kind of go to the craft itself, which is like, getting the right interaction design, visual design, user research, prototyping. A lot of these things you can even bring as consulting, right? And especially the fact is like, if you don't, and I completely agree, by the way, with Peter, that, what you say, what you do, and what you actually feel is all three different things. And sometimes the truth is like not even there. So you actually have to triangulate further in terms of different data sets. But more effectively, if a startup is trying to kind of build this function, get it first in your mindset. And because of which you will bring the right, you'll consistently keep thinking about who's my user. You don't need an interaction designer to come and define a persona for you. You need to know who your user is. You need to know what makes them click. You don't need to kind of clearly have a designer to come and workflow it for you and say this step A and step B and step C should happen in this sequence. You need to know that, why should actually step A and step B even exist? So when you start getting into that high level of minimalism, high level of, customer empathy, goodness will happen. And whenever you can afford a freelancer or a team and so on and so forth, you will hire them because you'll start realizing that. Just the same way as your founder starts and they are doing the accounting, they are doing the invoicing, they are doing everything. And sooner or later, they realize that it's a specialized role and we're going to bring someone in. But the money and how you look at money is going to be something that you bring in your mindset from day one. Design is the same way.
Peter, you want to go next?
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that I would add to that is for a startup, so I've been a founder, getting money for anything is tough, right? And something like design has such a slow and mostly incalculable return on investment. Like it's very difficult. And so, I'm also an investor in startups. And when founders say like, hey, we need this design, I would never ask, okay, so what's the return on investment on that? Because it's just too difficult, right? Like some things are, you just cannot calculate. And so, for a company as large as, well, Facebook, right? That would, you'd be able to have a discussion based on what about if our users use this function 10% more, or we can, keep eyeballs on these ads for 20% longer, right? That's, you can add some kind of metric to that. And then you have a business goal. For a startup, most startups don't know if they have product market fit for a long time. That's the truth, is most startups are people failing constantly, keep thinking they've got product market fit, and they often don't, right? So, having the outset of we're going to have a good design from day one is often impossible, and justifying how you're going to afford to do that is really difficult. So it does come down to the founder. The founder or the founding team or one of the early employees needs to just be obsessed with design to a level where they'll just think about this stuff, and they care enough that they will just do it. I think it'd be really difficult to raise money to improve your design as a startup unless you're already in that kind of funding circle, with some kind of revenue.
Okay. I'm going to just try and club a bunch of questions because, I want to sort of try and cover as much ground as we can. Here's a question. It says, thank you for sharing the role and impact of design in the consumer business. Does design play a role in the enterprise business where most of the interactions are driven by APIs that are invisible? Satyam, do you want to?
I can take a stab at it because 60% of our clients come in the enterprise space. It's interesting. I was hired at Citrix from PayPal to like, hey, we need the consumerization of IT. Can we bring a consumer, internet guy here? And then that's how the journey started. Foundationally, when you look at enterprise products, it's APIs or backends. See, again, if you look at it from a UI level or a consumer level, like, hey, it looks really nice, it animates well, it kind of engages well, so on and so forth. Yes, I mean, many people immediately kind of look at it and say, enterprise does not have a lot of design. And I always say, if there's users in your system, you need user experience. You need to understand what their insights are. You need to understand how they're using the product. Especially enterprise products, when you start looking at them, they are very, they have a foundational problem around engagement and productivity. Let's talk about, like, you know, if you're looking at hardcore network security software or something of that order, you still need to kind of design a system that you can immediately understand, evolve, you know, kind of act upon. So there's all those design problems that are still very valid problems. And then when you, this is just on a, what I would call on a UI and a UX level, but when you start looking at experience level, right, developer experience was something that we worked with one of the large financial companies. And the big challenge there was, how does someone understand, like when you go into a company and you kind of have an API layer, how do you understand which API to go? How do you search for it? How do you kind of create new APIs? There's a whole experience around that. How do you collaborate and communicate with the other stakeholders? There's experiences around that. Now, if someone has to design those for those to be highly effective and highly efficient. And enterprise is actually leaving a lot of money on the table. And for those companies that are not thinking of design as a force multiplier, you effectively are opening it up for anyone to come and disrupt them from a side swipe. And I would just say that, you know, that's a myth, that enterprise does not need experience and, more importantly, design. In fact, Facebook has been trying to do something very much that, you know, Citrix was doing as an enterprise company. I mean, they're building load balancers and technology of that order. AWS, which came from Amazon, is again, because everyone's starting to put to that level of what do consumers want and how do I want to package that well. And that's exactly where money is kind of being left out on the table.
Okay. For all you participants, Sheldon has left a resource that you can look up. It's in the chat window. So yeah, that saves us some time. Okay, Sheldon, let me direct the next question to you. This is an anonymous attendee who asks, how do you show the CEO and senior executives the impact of UX as early as possible? They often do not see or understand the impact until months or years after investing. I guess a little bit of what, you know, Peter was also alluding to. What are some of the ways that we can show early impact even before something is launched?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I go back to the user research point I was making, because many times that to actually launch something, right, takes months, right, if not longer, depends on the nature and the scope of your product. But the quickest way you can see impact, whether people like it or not, to find your product market fit is through qualitative user validations, right? And in different workshops, or research sessions, right? Or it could be a, you know, focus group discussion. It could be, you know, usability testing. It could be many methods, right? Or ethnographic studies. You go visit people in their real life scenarios to validate your product concept. So I do think that, hey, try to do your research as early as possible. And also, I think the myth of research is that I want to break the myth, right? Is that you don't have to be a super hardcore academic kind of researcher, right, to be able to do that. In the early stage of my career, I was just really lucky to be able to follow a very solid research manager and to see how he conducts it, even though I'm a designer. But I learned some methodologies and I was not afraid, right, to do it. So I just bring my paper prototypes, sometimes my wireframes, sometimes a digital prototypes, whatever you have at hand, depending on the stage and how soon you want to validate those concepts, right? Bring this on the street, bring this to your neighbors, to your friends, to your, you know, targeted segments. And with the finding, bring it back to your company, to your senior executive, right? To say, hey, you know, we thought A, or we had a couple of hypotheses. And after validation with a number of users, right? My initial finding is that hypothesis A has more chance to be successful because 1, 2, 3, and the hypothesis B and C is more likely to fail because whatever other reasons. So I feel that is quickest, cheapest way, right? To bring, to show value to your management team.
Okay. Peter, the next one is completely down your alley. It says, how do we convince the management of big fat banks to invest in design and sleek products rather than carrying legacy and heavy products for their corporate customers because they're always crying about budget? Well, Anupam, firstly, I think you should show them the research that Peter has done to begin with. But yeah, Peter.
Yeah, you won't. They will, some of these retail banks will die, and in 20 years there'll be a Netflix documentary about them, right? And it'll say, how did they get it so wrong? And then everyone will go, God, or if only they'd, thought about it. You can see they're worried because the challenger banks are having such an impact. It's crazy that something as, banks don't need brand loyalty, right? Like nobody is loyal to their bank. Nobody goes to bed at night and thinks, HSBC, I can't wait to get up and speak to them, right? Just never happens. It's not happened once.
Yeah.
These are organizations that serve a purpose for everybody. Everybody has a bank. Well, most people have banks, right? And the truth is the banks that are run by people that are data driven and, cost conscious and won't take a risk and invest in teams that understand new technologies, then they will see what happens when you don't do that, which will be you lose market share to the banks that do. And, the traditional banks that are listening, if you look at Barclays, their new app is amazing. If Barclays was relaunched today as a challenger bank, it would be as good as Monzo, honestly. It doesn't have that perception yet because it's still Barclays. They're still a legacy bank, or at least an older bank, but they are listening. And in the next 5 years, you'll see these challenger banks struggle as the traditional banks move more towards their playground, right? But you're not going to convince these 60-year-old CEOs to start, advertising on TikTok or investing in decent native apps. Just won't happen.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Satyam, I'm going to club two questions and point them in your direction. So there's one here that says, in some situations, for example, performance review or asking for more headcount, where we need to prove the value of design and user experience, like the real value, this proves to be a hard task. So do you have any tips on how we can communicate this across? That's one question. And just in the interest of time, I'm going to ask one more question, which is, how can CMOs evolve into becoming chief experience officers for startups and brands? What are some of the steps in exposure that you recommend?
Well, two loaded questions, so I'll try to kind of simplify as much as possible. Could you again quickly, I was taking notes. Can you remind me the first question again?
It's basically about how do you, especially in a performance review sort of a situation, how do you drum up support for, say, more headcount by showing real value, and any tips on how to communicate that?
So I'll take that one first, because headcounts is a very interesting measure of, and I actually feel it's more of a vanity measure, because when you're having that conversation, it's not a winning conversation by any means. Because foundationally what happens is when you're saying, I want one more headcount, I want a researcher, one more designer, you're kind of fighting an uphill battle of trying to even explain the benefit of design. And I would actually first resonate with what Peter said, right? And I would say, I have, after being in this profession for about 20 years, I would say very strongly that there's some companies that get it and will do it. Some companies won't get it and will never do it. Just because the environment that needs to be set up for good experience and good design to be built is a very deliberate effort. When you say, I'm going to talk to users, I'm going to build the product, I'm going to test it, I'm going to iterate it, I'm going to go through that whole cycle. And either that you have that mindset or you don't. Because if you don't have that mindset, everything is going to be justification. And it's very much an uphill battle. So when you're going to someone and say that I need, one designer, one, visual designer, or whatever that is, any of these skills, it actually will always be a question of why. What are you going to do with it? And the second problem I see related to that is most times headcounts are attached to, we need to build an app, we need to build it. It's very tactical problems. And when tactical problems kind of come in, and most times, and especially when you look at it in the UI level, an engineer can say that I can build that, I can leverage that. A product manager can say that, I can test, I can go and talk to users and come back to that. So effectively, again, you're fighting with these silos. But more importantly, if you could kind of come back and say that this is where headcount conversations kind of become very different. Again, being on the business side of running a firm, I can tell you this, that, most business leaders want more value to be created in their organization. If the conversation is more so around, hey, I need to put a research effort around identifying all our lead users, that means all the users that are using my product in unintended ways so we can define new market shares, I'm telling you that probably will be a better conversation, because the opportunity of that headcount means that you can probably open up new markets. Are we going to prototype a way to challenge our challengers or disrupt the markets on our end? And that's going to define, a lot of the strategy teams do that effort, different way of having your headcount. Then actually saying that, hey, I have 10 people, 10 features I need to build, I need one more designer, that always will become a big challenge. The second part of the question, which was like, how do CMOs kind of become chief experience officers? Again, it's a mindset. If you don't have the mindset, you can never end up becoming there, right? And mostly if you look at traditionally, marketing is where in business schools, they teach you how to kind of do, understand users, build market research, kind of evolve that. So I think it's an adjacent profession that is very well suited to kind of take on this role. But the problem with marketing is it's kind of not in the doing part. It's a lot about telling the part, but actually when the doing comes, that's where engineering, and most of the companies have deep engineering teams, deep product teams, especially in the tech world, or deep business teams. Now, how do you kind of build that? How do you kind of bring them along? How do you kind of do these rapid conversations? The foundational problem that happens in a lot of companies is research is only kept to the people that are doing the research or are consuming the research. And there's a huge philosophy that we have noticed is what we call the empathy quotient. The engineer or that person on the floor, if they do not have that empathy to what they're building for, who they're building for, highly unlikely that they will hit the target. And therefore, and how does the CMO or anyone else in that role, how do they kind of make sure that data percolates all the way to the last person on the floor, including somebody whom you may think would be completely inconsequential in that particular design or that role? That's when true magic happens. And it's, again, I would keep repeating, iterating on the word. It's a mindset before it's a skill and before it's a craft.
Great. Thank you, Satyam. Sheldon, I think you can take this next question. What do you think is a unique value you as a design leader can bring to the organization? In your past experience, what did your successful partnership with other leads look like? Now, I know, Sheldon, that, for example, at your, during your time at Grab, I think, one of the things that you must be particularly proud about is the 20x growth in revenue that sort of came about, and, with the tenet of design really being sort of a foundation. So yeah, our participant here would, like to hear some more of such inspirational stories.
Absolutely. I think the unique value a design leader, right? Thanks for this question, and it's an excellent question. A design leader can bring to the organizations, I would say still, we need to think in terms of what value do you bring in from a people's perspective, from products perspective, and from organizations perspectives, right? And the flip side is, hey, what does this experience bring to yourself, right? How do you grow as a leader? But from people's perspective, I think a design leader's first and foremost role is to bring the best quality designers, right? The best in class, world-class designers into the company. And you need to be able to really attract talent who want to share the same dream, the same goal with you, right? And I think that is super important. From a product perspective, in addition to the strategy, vision, contributions you need to bring as a cross-functional leader, I think it's really important as a design leader, you need to always stand from a user's perspectives and bring that user empathy onto the table, because different functions would have different focuses, right? For the right reasons. But the reason we want to have those kind of for instance, the traditional product engineer design kind of partnership is because we all care about users' perspective, right? So that's from product. And from organizations, I think with the prior questions we've answered, really is about how do you build a user-centric culture, right, into the community, company, and also how do you help to foster collaborations? Because I think with my experience, especially when I was a consultant, I really realized that many clients I worked with, including in-house companies I worked for, right? There is just boil down to one problems every company shares is that people work in silo. It's not because people don't want to collaborate, it's because collaboration has a cost. But as seasoned design leaders, right, when we have gone through so many different design thinking workshops, so we have our own experience to see what's working, what's not working, then we bring those into the organizations, right? We really can help, companies to solve this collaboration challenge. And I think the other what was the follow-up question, right? Let me just try to find the Q&A stuff. Yeah, and the successful partnership, I would really want to take my current role at Facebook as an example. Facebook has a really, I would say, top of the notch collaboration model. As mentioned, we have the product engineer design, but we also have a data scientist, we have product marketing, we have research, we have content strategist, etc., right? All these functions works very closely on covering from both team health perspectives, right? Product mission strategy perspectives, quality, right? And many other business goals, business objectives. So we work as true partnerships, bring our unique perspectives, and we hold each other accountable. So it's a super healthy relationship. So I'm just, really proud of what we have.
Mm-hmm. Satyam, would you also like to add something? Because I think you have a good inside out and an outside in view, as through your sort of career arc.
So are you talking about collaboration per se?
Yeah.
So I think at least one philosophy that I've come together with for most high-tech companies, which is it takes 3 to kind of build a good product, which is good product managers working with good engineers, working with good designers. And when I say designer, I use design as a profession, not as an individual designer, because it's technically 5 skills that come together there. And highly collaboration overall, I completely would agree that, most companies, and in fact, I would say this as a design, from a design perspective, when you look at a company's experience, or a UI, you quickly can understand to a high level how their organization is structured. And whether that's even a car, in fact, we drive a car where, that the display guys are a different department from the machine, from the industrial design guys. And you just know because how they are created and then finally figured it out. So collaboration could have solved that. Now, collaboration does have a cost. I really like that statement. But the fact is not doing collaboration has a much higher cost. Because you release a product and then you kind of realize that, it's kind of now you're backtracking it and so on and so forth. The fact is that you can rapidly iterate on those, especially in internet and consumer products, right? You can kind of release a product, you can do a bucket test and you can come back to it. But when you look at a product that actually spends a lot of time and engineers it, lack of collaboration, lack of breaking that silo is actually, it's completely going to kill a company. I'll just give you an example very quickly is, we were running design at a large software company, and we built the product. 1.5 years later, it was released, and we did not collaborate with the professional services team. When you build a product, you need to think about the migration experience. But most time, the migration experience to your product comes from professional services or your channel partners. But we never spoke to them because they were a silo, they were a different group. So that whole thing took another whole year because customers didn't move to it. Because we built 1.5 years, awesome product, released it out there, and customers are like, I don't know how to rip and replace my product to get there. And it took another year to kind of redo that work. And by that time, the company already lost. And this is, again, a $15 billion company lost the momentum. And somebody else came in and took that market. That company still struggles. I mean, it's eventually come out of it. But I can tell you very quickly that this is what happens when you do not have that level of collaboration as a consultant, business consultant. And more importantly, when you're not thinking of that experience in the journey that somebody's going to go through, because you're just working through what you are working in your silo.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. Peter, there's a question here which says, or rather asks, how is design evolving with the advent of voice-based and biometric-based interactions versus what was visual earlier?
I'm not sure I have a particularly strong opinion about that, really.
Okay.
It introduces complexity. Instead of seeing some words, you hear some words, but the experience is pretty similar. Anyone who's used a Google Home or a Alexa knows that half the time they're a pain in the ass, right? The experience isn't good a lot of the time. Like, you know, so I always set timers instead of alarms, and then they go off at weird times, right? So we're not there yet. People who make these products, they have to go through the same process that software designers do, right? It's just a new medium more than anything else.
Okay. So I'll keep it with you, Peter. We've got a question on email, which asks, how do you scale product design while maintaining consistency?
Yeah, very difficult. You know, one of the questions earlier about headcount, you know, made me laugh, because that would be a telltale sign to me that you're in the wrong company if the question is, how can we increase headcount, right? Because a lot of the time, one or two people can do the work of 10 if they don't have to go to the meetings that all 10 do, you know? I don't know. I mean, Sheldon, I butchered your name again, really sorry, but you've probably got way more experience than me. I should probably shut up on that question. That's probably, you know.
But you know, I totally agree with you, right? If we can all stop doing meetings, right, we'll all be much more productive. But in terms of scaling the design, right, while maintaining consistency, I think what we usually do, especially in larger corporations, we tend to rely heavily on design systems. And this is also, I think, industry-wide best practices, because if you can utilize this collection of components or pattern libraries, and also offer a set of standard guidelines, right, which explains why you have those components in place, then I think that would really amplify the efficiency of the design teams. I would say that is probably the most important thing, right, to scale any design for consistency purpose. But we also need to realize that a design system really is a living system. It's not something you create today and then that's the end of it, right? It's just the beginning, and you need to continuously evolve, because your product and the company's needs, users' needs, business needs will constantly evolve, right? So new patterns, new components needs to be developed. So we need to make sure that, hey, design system, really, you need to have a team in place to maintain it. And on the other hand, at Facebook, we also invest in powerful prototyping tools, where the tool actually is connected with our latest design systems, so that our designers, right, can use this tool to really maximize their efficiency and to very quickly build a product that's with all the interactive live components, and so that we can do very accurate user testings and validation. And when we pass to our engineers, because those are all set of standards, that also doesn't require a lot of front-end development time. So I think design system and the relevant design tools are the answers, right, for larger corporations.
Okay,
Yeah,
awesome.
it's relevant too.
Yeah, we've got just 4 minutes left. So, you know, I don't see any unanswered questions. So I'm going to quickly then slip in the last question, which again has come on email. And, you know, it says that, I suppose I kind of agree with this, because a lot of what we've discussed is for design folks, right? Folks who are sort of in the profession, in the trade. But if you were to sort of talk just generically to, you know, someone who doesn't understand design very well, how would you sort of pitch the importance of design thinking to non-designers? Sheldon, you go first, and then we do a round robin.
Sure. Yeah, this is an awesome question. I think design thinking really is not just for designers, right? It's almost for everyone. I use it for my kids, right, to do their homework. So that's how relevant and how useful it is. So I think at the core, design thinking is just about collaborations and systematic problem solving. That is what is universally applicable to many different scenarios. It offers a defined process, right, that helps us to systematically extract, to teach, learn, and apply those human-centered techniques. I think the key is human-centered, because lots of, when we talk about solving our problems, whose problem is it, right? We're solving somebody. It's a human being, right? So I think this human-centered technique, right, we need to really use it, and therefore to help us solve the problems very creatively and collaboratively. So I think this design thinking process, right, that would lead you to think much more holistically and thoroughly. And so I think that is probably, I would say, for non-designer folks, right, who are interested in using design thinking framework to tackle problems, you really need to think of this key 5 steps. I think number 1 is to make sure that you empathize. You empathize with your users. Number 2 is to define your users' needs, their problems. I think number 3, you need to ideate and by challenging assumptions and creating a different or innovative hypothesis. Number 4 is you need to prototype to really start to build some solutions, right? To land to number 5, you test, and you can test your solutions if they're relevant or not.
Yeah. Okay, Peter?
Yeah, just exactly that. Prototype, test, try stuff. Even people who call themselves experts don't know what they're talking about half the time. So we just try more stuff than everyone else. So I can't put it better than you just did. So yeah. Okay.
And Satyam?
I'll keep to my theme of mindset, right? So any leader, in fact, it's a mindset that design thinking is not for designers by any means. Just to give you a sense, I mean, I'm right now in our office in a studio. No one else is here, only me. So, but this studio was design thought. Now, what do I mean by that? This means that we were given a space and we said we're going to design our own studio. So we actually put tape on the floor multiple times. So we were prototyping how exactly should the conference room be? How should the table be? How much space do you have to kind of maximize the potential? So everything, we taped it at least about half a dozen times before we actually gave the design to the contractor to build. That's design thinking. How you prototype your org structure is design thinking. There's a design thinking all through. It's a mindset. The 2 things and within those 5-step process, which again has a lot written about it online, so anyone can quickly search for it, is foundationally empathize and iterate, right? If you have deep empathy as an organization, everything will magically, automatically set up. The silos will break, everything will evolve because you know why you're kind of doing what you're doing for your user. And if you're willing to iterate that, there's no right answer or wrong answer. In fact, I feel that if you look at the whole philosophy of design, there's a foundational problem that the technical design or the skill design actually doesn't follow the best practices that has happened in prior design skills. Like, Peter called out hotels or restaurants have service design. The same thing hasn't really been applied with prototyping and testing here. So I would strongly say that design thinking just purely, further evolved to high empathy and high iteration will just give you huge, huge value in everything you do, not only design as a craft.
Okay, super. Thank you. We're just done with time. So big thank you to our panelists. You've been fabulous. And I hope it's been, just as sort of informative and valuable for our audience as it has been for me. Big shout out to everybody who also logged in. I know for some of you it's late, for some of you it's bright and early. So thank you. Satyam, Peter, and Sheldon, big thank you for taking the time out. It was a wonderful conversation. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for your facilitation. Awesome.
Bye.
Yeah.